slowed down. So, I mean, I'll let people in as if anyone else arrives, but I guess we'll get started. My name is David Zismore. I am an analyst at the CPUC. I've been working with the IPRP for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now, and working on Diablo Canyon issues a little bit longer than that. This IPRP meeting is the first in 2023. I think it's the first one since we had one back at the beginning of October. My apologies for delaying this. I think initially we had planned to do this in early April, and we had to push it back just to some scheduling conflicts. But thank you to everybody for being here, and we can discuss this later. But hopefully, the meeting later this year, maybe we can have a hybrid online in-person meeting, so everybody can actually see each other in person, assuming everything is well for everyone. So we can discuss that later on. I will quickly share the agenda here. Find it. Here we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. So these are our topics. I sent this agenda out late yesterday afternoon, so hopefully everyone received it, but here it is just for your viewing. First thing I'd like to do, and I'm going to minimize this again for the time being since I need to be able to see everybody's little rectangles on my screen. If the IPRP, well, we could just kind of go around and introduce, everybody can maybe introduce themselves. There's a lot of people on the IPRP, and I know there's been a bit of turnover the last few years. So maybe people who've been attending this would just like to refamiliarize yourselves with the people who are actually on the IPRP. So like I said, I'll start. I'm David Zismore at the CPUC. Bob, you're the other CPUC person. So why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Bob Anderson. I work with David Zismore on the IPRP. I'm with the CPUC Energy Division.
And many of you know Bob because he's worked on several of the other agencies that are also on the IPRP. Is anyone here from the Coastal Commission?
Yes, this is Joseph Street. I'm on the phone today, sorry. I am the staff geologist with the California Coastal Commission.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joseph. I see a couple people here from the Energy Commission. Can our Energy Commission representatives chime in?
Good afternoon, Justin Cochran, Nuclear Policy Advisor and Emergency Coordinator with the Energy Commission.
And I am Mike Turner, Engineering Geologist for the Energy Commission.
Great, thanks, guys. There's several people here from the California Geological Survey. If you could all introduce yourselves.
Hey, this is Tim Dawson. I'm with the California Geological Survey Seismic Hazards Program.
And I'm Rui Chen from California Geological Survey.
I'm Judy Zachariason from California Geological Survey, Seismic Hazards Program.
Okay, I thought maybe I saw Gordon Seitz in here.
He's
somewhere.
here. I think he's on mute or he's having problems with his audio.
Okay, well, Gordon is here. We'll acknowledge that he is. If he needs to chime in a little bit later, he can. California Seismic Safety Commission.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jiawang Connolly, California Seismic Safety Commission, now part of Cal OES.
And Cal OES.
Good afternoon. I'm Nate Ortiz, Assistant Director of Planning and Preparedness at Cal OES.
And finally, I don't know if I saw County of San Luis Obispo. I don't know if Supervisor Gibson is on here, but
I am indeed David Bruce Gibson. I'm the 2nd District Supervisor for the County of San Luis Obispo. For those of you who don't know me, I hold a doctorate in geophysics, and in a previous lifetime, I was a research exploration seismologist. It's really good to see all of you, old friends and new here.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Good to see you, or at least hear you. Thank you to everybody who's here. Do the parties who are here who are not part of the IPRP, would you like to introduce yourselves? I know I can see a couple of different organizations that I recognize, but I don't recognize everybody by name.
John Giesman from the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility.
Hi, John. Good to see you again.
Michelle Becker, Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility.
David Weissman, Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility.
Good to have both of you here again. Thank you. Is anybody from Mothers for Peace here? Okay, maybe they will join in a little bit later. I know there's several people from PG&E. Could you all introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi David. This is Jeff Bachber, Director of the PG&E Geosciences Department. And our department is responsible for managing the long-term seismic program and also the upcoming seismic update related to SB 846. And we have a number from our team. I'll pass to you, Albert, and then if you could pass to the next person. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Albert Kotke with Geosciences, geotechnical earthquake engineer with the group. Chris, over to you.
Chris Medugo. My background is in earthquake geology, and I support the long-term seismic.
Okay.
Horseman, go ahead. You're on mute. So why don't we jump Tyson?
Sure. Tyson Smith. I'm an attorney with PG&E.
Bill Horseman was muted. He's
Go back to Bill.
I think I'm unmuted. Do you hear me now, Jeff?
Yeah, we can hear you, Bill.
Okay, Bill Horseman. I'm a principal civil engineer, PG&E Geosciences. I worked for 27 years on the Diablo Canyon plant, so I'm very familiar with the seismic safety and especially the PRA update, which was done a number of years ago in response to the NRC's request related to the Fukushima accident. So I bring that to the table.
okay. Then we also have Megan Stanton.
Good afternoon. This is Megan Stanton. I'm a seismologist in PG&E Geosciences. I manage the operation and maintenance of the Central Coast Seismic Network.
And I think that covers who's here from PG&E right now. More may join, but right now I think that's good.
Great, thank you. I see a couple of people from Department of Water Resources, Delphine and Colin.
This is Delphine Ho, Deputy Director of Statewide Water and Energy with Department of Water Resources. I'll hand it off. I see both Colin and Bob, so I'll hand it off to Colin.
Yep. Hi, folks. Colin Wood, Senior Staff Counsel at DWR, working on, among other things, SB 846 issues.
Hi, Bob Hedrick. I'm a colleague of Colin and with the Office of General Counsel at DWR, working on all things related to energy procurement.
Great, thank you guys. I don't recognize some of the other names, so and anyone who has not yet introduced themselves, please, and if you, Bob Budnitz, I see you're here. Bob, please go ahead. Bob, you're on mute.
I'm Bob Budnitz. I'm a member of the Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee. And just to short circuit the process, I'm going to introduce three people on this call who are affiliated with us. Furman Wardell, Rick McWhorter, and Andy Kadek are all technical consultants to the committee. And Bob Rathy is our administrative and office, and he's our legal counsel for the committee. Who isn't here are the other two members of the committee. So they're three members of the committee, but I'm the only member that's on.
Yes, thanks, Bob. Great that you're here. As IPRP and DCISC will be, working with each other going forward under SB 846. I know a couple of other people have joined. If anybody hasn't introduced themselves, please feel free to do so.
Hi, I'm Linda Seeley from San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace.
Oh, hi, Linda. Thanks for being here.
This is Deb Lexinger, hazards analyst and nuclear licensing specialist supporting DWR.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Knapp. I'm an attorney at the California Public Utilities Commission.
And this is Jack Mulligan, another attorney with the CPUC.
Okay, well, thanks to everybody for being here. I know it's a big room with lots of little boxes. So let's kind of move into the agenda. So the first item after introductions, it's the Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee report from February. As I'm sure everybody knows, under SB 846, SB 846 approved Public Utilities Code 712.1 E1, and I'll just read it here for ease of understanding. It says, in addition to the duties and responsibilities set forth in commission decisions, the Independent Safety Committee for Diablo Canyon shall do both of the following: consult with and incorporate into its assessments and recommendations the independent peer review panel established pursuant to Section 712. What the IPRP has been working on the last few months is this. Back in February, the DCISC held their first meeting of the year in which they approved their fact-finding and recommendations on a variety of subjects. For the purposes of the independent peer review, we looked at everything, but given the expertise of the members of the IPRP, the focus of our review was on the areas where they are expert in. As you may have seen in the email I sent last night, and I'll share the document shortly, the parties of the members of the IPRP reviewed the DCISC's fact-finding reports, focusing primarily on the November report because that's where the seismic studies were, but also on the January and February report, which had some seismic issues in them as well, and produced. Let me pull this document up. Just give me a moment here. So this is the bottom of it. Here's the top. Sorry. I assume, can everybody see this document?
Yes.
And it's a reasonable size. It's readable.
Oh, kind of, but I at least have the hard copy.
Yeah. So as you can see, this is just the introduction here. It goes through the fact-finding report. It reviews different portions of it. Each agency that provided comments it is identified at the beginning of each section where they made the comment. So you can see here where it says CGS. That means that these are the comments that they provided to us. Scrolling further down, you can see the Coastal Commission, the CPUC. I just want to kind of clarify here for everyone, and we say this in the report itself. Again, 712.1 makes the IPRP essentially a consultant for the DCISC. So we are required under SB 846 to conduct this review and then submit our comments to the DCISC. Again, this is the first time we've had to do something like this. So the DCISC, we'll be officially submitting it to them after this meeting. But the DCISC, since we're consultants, I don't read 712.1 as requiring them to adopt literally everything that we say in here, but they are to treat it as a consultation and take what we've said here under advisement, and how they ultimately incorporate it will come out, I think, in the DCISC's future meetings. But I want to throw it open to other members of the IPRP if you have any comments. If anyone has any comments you'd like to kind of add to what's in the report here, not the report, our comments here, comments and questions for the DCISC. I'd like to open the floor up to the other members.
This is Tim Dawson from CGS. I'll just state that the CGS comments, which are, I think, the first two that are listed, I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Most of what we looked at was specific to the seismic issues, just because we're geologists here at CGS and not engineers. So we wanted to focus on areas where we're subject matter experts. And I think what we would like to have is some of the background reports that the DCISC looked at, because we couldn't really evaluate the DCISC report conclusions without those underlying reports. So I think that's something on our list of things that we probably should look at in the future.
Thanks, Tim. Does anyone else have anything to add? I'm sorry. I don't know if I heard someone try to join in.
Well, I'm just curious if there's a response to that input. Are reports going to be forthcoming for everyone here? What is the process for obtaining that information for CGS's request?
Well, this is Bob Budnitz. I'm a member of the DCISC. And I have to preface what I'm saying here by saying that everything I'm going to say here between now and when this thing ends is my own personal view. I can't speak for the DCISC except when we have public meetings and then we adopt a position. And that position is in that fact-finding report. That fact-finding report is a DCISC position. But anything I might add to it here is mine. But nevertheless, I'm happy to respond. And I kind of think I reflect, and you'll be able to tell, I reflect the views of everybody, but I can't speak for them. One of the things that you said, your third comment, or your comment just now was saying, gee, you'd like to see the background reports that we relied on. Everything that we relied on in that fact-finding report on the seismic issues is in the citations. And every one of those citations is a public document. We didn't cite anything that wasn't a public document. And with the exception of PG&E sponsored a study that was done by UCLA experts about 2 or 3 years ago, about the safety issues with the independent spent fuel storage installation in the spent fuel pools. And that's a PG&E document. And we've got it, and I think it's in the public domain, but we didn't know how to cite it. So PG&E, I mean, they can provide it to you. It's out there somewhere. But except for that one that we cited, everything else in our report is a public document, and in those citations you can find it. And if you have trouble finding it, just let us know and we'll send it to you. But they're all out there. There isn't anything that we have relied on as a document that isn't cited. But there's some stuff that we relied on that isn't a document, and it's easy to explain. In November, I can't remember when it was, the first week of November, but it's the meeting we held with PG&E experts that supports that fact-finding report. We have fact-finding meetings. We met with more than a half a dozen of the PG&E seismic people, a lot of whom are on this IPRP meeting, this WebEx right now. We met them for most of a morning. And they provided us with some slides and some background information, and we had an extended discussion about what's new, because we asked the question, well, what's new? Or what's going on now in their long-term seismic program, for example, or other seismic work that is worth our understanding and knowing. And we took that in and we relied on it. Much of what we learned, in fact, I think all of what we learned is touched on in this fact-finding report itself. It tells you about the various areas that PG&E briefed us on, and it tells you about, I'm talking about technical work that they're doing that's new. And that new work we used and relied on when we wrote, and it's right here in our report, we wrote that we didn't see anything that was new. There's a lot of new stuff, but we didn't see anything that was new that would cause us to revisit and change the conclusions we had reached a few years ago, which are also cited in the fact-finding report. And those conclusions were based on published things. So we're following things carefully, new stuff, but our conclusion is there isn't anything new that would upset our previous conclusions. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I want to say, the comments that we have, that the IPRP members have put together on this report, it's a range of types of comments. Some of the comments are on technical issues that we would like to see, clarified, updated, just have the questions asked the next time around when you're going through the exercise. Some of them are, more for issues of formatting and clarification, ways to make it a little easier to understand and read. So it's not just one and the same. And if Tim and others are saying, they want to know about the background documents, it might be partly because they had trouble finding them when they were looking through the report. I had talked to some people, and I know that there were at least some comments about, maybe it's possible to attach documents, given the size of some of the technical documents that we've all seen in the past. I don't know how feasible it is. It could make it into a 2,000-page report if we attached everything. But, I think it's just, it's intended for a couple of purposes, which is trying to get questions asked in upcoming reports that the DCIC is going to approve, and try to help improve the process and provide comments as we were tasked with.
Yeah, fair enough.
Thanks,
Let me try to add to that. I think it'll be helpful for you. Several places in this IPRP thing that we got yesterday, the suggestion is made that we supplement what's in our thing with more detail or some more references, that sort of thing. And I'm confident. I said I can't speak for everybody, but I might as well. I'm confident we'll respond to those by adding that detail where it's appropriate. We'll just I'll just say that so that's straight. We'll consider adding that. Some things, the detail that's sought is much more than we could possibly add in this report. In which case, we'll just have to summarize and then refer. Okay, and if you want to go down the comments one by one, we can respond to them individually as you wish. Okay.
Hey, David, I just like to add that, for these reports, if they're publicly accessible, maybe we could set up a Dropbox or some sort of SharePoint where we can dump all these documents for our reference. I think that would be really helpful.
Well, some of them are small enough to send, but some of them are huge. I mean, we can't send you the PSHA from 2015. It's bigger than the Library of Congress. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. It's just way, it has appendices that are bigger than the Library of Congress. It's amazing. So we can't send that to you, and that's also true of the PRA. But they are public documents that are available. They're available in the NRC docket, for example. Maybe we just have to work together through an intermediary to show you how to tell you how to download.
Okay, yeah, that'd be helpful. Thanks.
The answer here is yes. We'll do what we can to make available everything.
I think in future incarnations of this, because as far as I can tell under SB 846, this is going to keep happening every time the DCISD has a meeting. We're tasked with reviewing it. We can kind of hopefully identify the documents that we're looking for at the early on in our process, and contact you to make sure that we have that we're able to access them. So I think part of it is just opening the lines of communication a little bit more and making sure that we talk to each other to find everything ahead of time.
And you can take my pledge that we'll do our part on that. Okay.
Great.
David, if I mind, it's Bruce Gibson.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Bruce.
Speaking to your original question is about the roles and responsibilities here. I think you had it correct, as has been the case for IPRP since its inception. Ours is to make comment to the relevant agency who is soliciting our comment. We don't have a regulatory role or a decision-making role in terms of consequences, but ours is independent peer review. And so it's a set of facts for those who have to make decisions based on this technical information to know that it had been set by a second set of eyes. And in that regard, it's always been my sense that IPRP has these various analyses that Bob references. As those analyses have come forward, that IPRP has voiced is an analysis of how certain are we that the conclusions drawn from these are good ones. And we have pointed out areas where we thought that there were, realms of uncertainty that we think should be addressed. And so, to the questions that the comments that came in, as I read the Independent Safety Committee's analysis of, was anything new presented? My impression, and again, I certainly stand to be corrected, but my impression was what was said there was we heard about some stuff. We were told that there was nothing new, and so we will stand by these previous reports, like the risk analysis, the hazard analysis that had been done previously. What wasn't immediately obvious to me was what information was presented, and does that justify a conclusion that the previous reports stand? But more, again, from the IP's perspective is, do there continue to be areas of uncertainty that we would like to point out, such that the conclusions in those areas should be revisited? And the visual that I always go back to is our famous tornado diagram, which shows the increasing uncertainty for a variety of different aspects of assessing ground motion at the site. And at the top of that tornado diagram was a factor of 2 uncertainty, as I recall, potentially a factor of 2 uncertainty based on local conditions around the site. And as I don't have the IPRP report immediately in front of me, as the PSSJ went forward, if I remember correctly, we said, look, uncertainty remains out there. It could be important, and we think it should be addressed. And so in that intervening span, if that uncertainty has not been reduced, I think that that's something that is important for us to comment on and make sure that we're consistent with previous comments on these various studies. And if I could follow, just that is the one place of uncertainty that I still wrestle with, and I certainly appreciate all the detailed comments who are made by folks who have a much deeper understanding of the analysis of the various components within the plant, whether they're nuclear or non-nuclear. I get all that, but this fundamental question of do we understand the local site materials condition in a way that would allow us to be confident about the peak ground motions. That's the one that still puzzles me.
Bruce, let me give you something I know you know, but for the others, a technical discussion about that. When the Big Shack Level 3 PSHA was done, 2014-15 was published. The NRC reviewed it, and the DCIC reviewed it, and lots of other people reviewed it too. And when the NRC endorsed it, go read their letter, and when we endorsed it, go read what we did. We came to two conclusions about the technical validity. The first was we thought that it was technically sound enough to be the basis for decisions. But crucially, that meant that the study itself had done a very good job of trying to capture and explain all the uncertainties so that decision makers could make their decisions facing that understanding of the uncertainties. They hadn't ignored it, quite the contrary. They had spent more effort on the uncertainties than almost anything else. Good for them. And when we said that we thought that it was a sound study, we meant not only was the technical work sound, but the understanding and exploration of uncertainties was sound. Because if that second thing wasn't true, then it wouldn't be sound. To me, I'm just speaking for myself, and Bruce, I bet you agree with me.
I know, I hear where you're going with it. I absolutely do.
So now different decision makers can then use that study and its explanation of uncertainties to either support or not support decisions they want to make. That's their prerogative. But when we say it's sound, what it means is that, at least in my view, and I think it was the technical community's view and the NRC's view, it was not only sound in the basic work they did, but it was sound in how they explained, explored, and tried to reduce and work hard on the uncertainties.
Yeah, I see where you're going, and eventually we have to make a public policy decision based on technical information that has some level of uncertainty in it. That's part of what keeps the public policy job interesting, right?
That's completely right. So then, when in our report just now, we did that work and we did the fact finding in November, and we wrote the report in February, and it was adopted by the committee. When the committee adopted the report that you have in front of you, that we're talking about here, our report, and said that we didn't see anything that was new, and there's a lot of new stuff. We didn't see anything that was new that would cause us to upset the previous conclusions and findings from a few years ago. What that meant was that the new information, while it's better, and it is, didn't cause us to modify our overall conclusions about the study and what it meant for safety. Okay? That doesn't mean that there isn't new stuff. It means there isn't any new stuff that would upset what was there before. That's what we concluded, and that's what we wrote, and that's what you're reading. Okay? I hope I can. Did I explain that?
I'm clear on where you are, and then it rests with the decision makers. I'll yield the floor at this point, David, to anybody who wanted to go into any of the specifics there.
Right, and then there's one other thing to say, and it's important. In that fact-finding report that you have, there's a section of it in which we listed several new pieces of information that have come before us. Some of it from the LTSP work, and some of it outside of the LTSP. That we have, so it's not as if we're ignorant of that information. We actually told you what it was. You know, there's this very interesting study about precarious rocks. There's interesting new work there's interesting new geodetic information. There's a whole bunch of stuff. There's interesting new analyses of earthquakes that have occurred since 2015. Small ones, but they're important. And we listed those and talked about them. So please don't think that we didn't say there isn't new information. You bet there is. But we concluded that new information didn't upset the previous bottom line conclusions that we had reached.
Bob Anderson first, and then Jeff.
Yeah, that's a great point about the LTS long-term seismic program. One of the areas that I struggled with this was not having seen new information from 2017 and forward from the long-term seismic program. That being said, you can't review what you don't see. That was the biggest point there. And when you mentioned in your report that there were some things that didn't move the needle very much, if you will, as far as not causing you to sway to change your former position, which is your prerogative, is that I couldn't follow you with that because I didn't know what the long-term seismic program updates were. So there is a void there.
That's
So
fair
I'm
enough.
not
And
criticizing
it seems
your
that
report.
PG&E has to
I'm
make.
just saying we just didn't have that part of the puzzle. That's what I'm saying. And
Some of it, for example, was what was presented at previous IPRP meetings. For the example, the precarious rock study. I attended a briefing of the IPRP. I can't remember if it was the last meeting or the one before, in which there was a half an hour spent on that precarious rock study before your IPRP, right there, and it's now in a referee journal. So that's available for you. You know, I mean that's one example, and there's a list of others.
Well, my hand's still up, and so I'm going to respond briefly. Is that I'm going to ask PG&E for the long-term seismic program material updates on either a website you can direct us to or something, so we can at least have it reviewed and be up to speed where you guys are at. Seems like we're trailing you a little bit. Okay, that's what I want to get up to speed on, and I'm done.
Jeff, I think I still see you in here somewhere.
Yeah, can you hear me okay, David?
Yes.
So I'll respond to some of that. Bob mentioned that essentially the presentation we gave last October to the IPRP was what we presented and went through with the DCIFC in November. And so that most of that work had been presented in the October IPRP meeting, and it's in that presentation. Our presentation today, we will give another update and go over some of the key research or new information that we're finding, including tracking results from the Turkey earthquake and a planned reconnaissance that we're scoping out. And we also will review the plan to perform our seismic update, which is a covenant to SB 846. So we'll do a thorough compilation and evaluation of all the new information since the 2015 comprehensive shack study. Plus, we'll also be re-reviewing that. That will be made available when that work's completed. And we'll go through that. So Albert has a presentation to give you an idea there. So there's more information coming. Sources that already have been prepared, we can direct you to where you could find those. Again, public information. We do have some new publications, peer-reviewed journal publications on newer research that Albert will also be covering today.
This is Bob to respond. I appreciate that very much. Jeff, we're going to need to get caught up to where you are. So if you have the things from 2015, 2017 now on the LTSP and not just a PowerPoint or a discussion in the IPRP meetings of that time, what I'm looking for are the peer-reviewed journals, are the completed PG&E reports on whatever the subjects were, and how do they fit into the greater scheme of things, which I guess will be presented in your site assessment to come still.
Jeff, just one question. Does the presentation you have later on go into the timeline on when all these reviews and updates will be completed and then available?
Yeah, it goes through the timeline for our seismic update. Yep.
Okay. I mean, if anyone has anything else to say about the IPRP's comments going to the DCISC, please feel free to say them. The intention of this meeting was not to go over the comments line by line. I don't think we have enough time for that. We're a pretty verbose bunch as it is, and trying to go over eight pages of sometimes technical speak would take far more than 2 hours, I'm sure.
But David, there is one
Yes.
important thing I want to say. This is me speaking, but I believe it's the DCIS's position, and it has to do with scope. I mean, there's a lot of technical comments you've made, and I've already said we're going to try to respond to them. You know, you want more detail here, and you want a reference there, that sort of thing. But there's one thing having to do with scope I need to explain. The DCISC, I believe, this is my view, but I believe that the DCISC believes that its scope does not extend to evaluating seismic damage that poses little or no threat to the safety of the public. Okay, now that's important. But we have concluded that workspace seismic safety is important. So if an earthquake that doesn't otherwise cause, let's say, a very large release all on its own, can cause damage to a building that would then harm the workers that have to respond and make sure the thing is safe. That's in our scope, you bet, because that could then provide a safety. That's a scenario for a safety compromise. So we are concerned with the seismic safety of facilities, for example, that could harm the workers that have to respond to the big earthquake. But we are not concerned with seismic safety of a piece of equipment that has no public safety significance at all, even though it might compromise the ability of the plant to make electricity. We have interpreted our scope as such that what I just said is outside it. And our interpretation of that is based on go read our charter and then go read SB 846, neither of which says anything beyond what we really have concentrated on, which we think is called nuclear safety. You know what that is? That's an accident that causes radiological harm to the workers or the environment or offsite, and that's that sort of thing. That's something that's the main thing we do. That's what we do. So it's very important for people on this call, and the IPRP and anybody else who's listening, to understand that we have interpreted our scope the way I just said, with the idea that an earthquake that causes little or no threat to the safety of the public and causes little or no threat to the workers is outside our scope.
David, if I could jump in on that, because I read an analysis where IPRP is interpreting our scope to include the overall reliability of the plant. If you can just speak to that, that may be a CPUC viewpoint. So just two things. One of it is, in terms of the IPRP coming to agreement on a work product here, could you speak to that question of scope and maybe get a sense of the IPRP, what scope we're going to adopt? Understanding and respecting Bob's analysis of the DCISC. And then the second is, as we're not going through these comments line by line, is it sort of our expectation that we would hold the IPRP to endorse these comments as going forward as our work product for this cycle?
Yes. I mean, I think before we move on to the next item, we would just kind of all, I don't know, raise our hands or something and say that, our names are, everybody's name from each member group is at the end of the document. And so the idea is that once this meeting is concluded, we will have endorsed this set of comments to be then submitted up to the DCISC. And then just, and sorry, and just.
I'll vote in the affirmative on that at this point.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I guess since Bruce is voting in the affirmative, I guess if anyone is voting in the negative, I guess would maybe be the question. Is there anybody objecting to submitting this set of comments to the DCISC? Okay, I don't see any nays. Just in terms of scope, maybe this is something for the attorneys to hash out going forward to just make sure that we're all on the same page. But Bruce, I think you're right. I think that our task is maybe a little broader in terms of looking at reliability of the plant itself. But I think that also kind of dovetails with the IPRP's overall expertise and reason for being, which is to work on seismic safety and nuclear safety, and to help the CPUC interpret those issues and provide its expertise on those issues as they come before the CPUC, because the CPUC in and of itself doesn't have that type of expertise, which is why the IPRP was created. But at the same time, if the DCISC is taking the position that the scope of their review is nuclear safety and doesn't extend to these reliability questions in terms of the provision of electricity to the grid overall, to the extent that it's not caused by a nuclear issue, I can understand that. We might want to have to talk about that a little bit further, but I understand it. And the IPRP would still have that larger scope as part of its purview, and it could come up in other ways that don't necessarily involve the DCISC.
There's a couple things that I need to add about what I just said, and it's important you understand. And again, this is my view, not the DCISC's, but I kind of think it's the DCISC. There are scenarios, earthquakes, that cause the kind of damage I mentioned that don't threaten nuclear safety, but could substantially limit the way the plant makes electricity in for a long time. They're outside our scope, providing that's true. But we do, and we insist we will do, and we have done examinations of those scenarios to make sure that's true. We're just not going to turn our back on them. We're going to look at them to make sure that those scenarios do not, in fact, threaten what we call nuclear safety. So it's not just turning our back on them, it's reviewing them sufficiently to assure that what I said is so. And then our scope ends in the sense that we're not going to spend a lot of resources digging into, well, one thing you might say is how to reduce the likelihood or how to reduce the consequences. That's just outside our scope. Okay, now I have one more thing I want to add, and then maybe I'm done. And that is one of your comments along the way. It came from the CPUC. I'll read it to you. It's just one sentence. There is no mention of reactor coupons in the body of the November fact-finding report with respect to seismic safety. And I just want to comment on that because it's new and it's easy to explain. We have examined that. The coupons have to do with the integrity of the pressure vessel as it perhaps becomes increasingly embrittled because of neutron irradiation over the years, and assuring that that vessel remains sufficiently strong. We have looked at the scenarios, and others have looked at the scenarios too in the NRC, and there are reports about it in literature, in which an earthquake initiates the cold water injection that causes the vessel to become brittle. It's called pressurized thermal shock. And those scenarios exist, but they have been examined extensively in the literature. And the conclusion is that the seismic contribution to those scenarios is very small. It's not zero, but it's very small. It's not an important piece of the seismic risk to the plant. Okay, and I can explain that in more detail if you want. But I just want to say that one of the comments in this document seeks a treatment of that in our report, and we're not going to, although we could mention it briefly, just because we have earlier concluded, and it's a broad industry, not just nuclear industry, but the broad community of experts have concluded that that is not an important scenario. Just leave you with that. That's the only other technical thing I wanted to say.
We'll go to Sam, and then Bob. I don't know if you still want Bob Anderson. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but Sam, you can go next.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to Dr. Gibson's comment about the scope of the IPRP. I am the author of AB 1632, which was the legislation that started this process. And ended up with the IPRP serving this role. And the legislation that was signed by the governor explicitly focuses not on safety, but on rates and reliability issues, which are the purview of the states as opposed to the preemption that comes under federal statute. So I want to support Dr. Gibson's comment that this is in fact well within the scope of the IPRP. And I also had just a question, and maybe it is for Dr. Gibson. There have been many other IPRP recommendations, at least that I see in the past. I was wondering if Dr. Gibson could speak to whether or not he felt that the input provided by the IPRP had resulted in the kind of work, analysis, or reaction that helped resolve some of the concerns that had been expressed previously.
Well, I don't want to make too much of a global statement on that. I think that it is the IPRP is commenting to try to make sure important issues are addressed, and I think important issues are being addressed. As to how much uncertainty is being reduced, we haven't really sat down and gathered that. I mean, take for instance the precariously balanced rocks. I mean, that's an interesting idea, but I don't know that that particular body of data has influenced anything about the IPRP's I don't think again, I'll speak for myself and not the IPRP as a whole, but I don't see that as having quantitatively reduced uncertainty in areas where I think the IPRP was fairly strong in expressing its concern that uncertainty should be reduced. I hope that makes sense. Work is underway, but I think there's still ways to go.
Bob Anderson, please go ahead.
Did it again. Unmute. Dr. Budnitz, thank you for addressing the coupon issue. I did see the thermal shock information mentioned in the SPRA as I was reviewing it. One of the things that was mentioned in the February DCISC meeting quite a bit was about coupons. And so that was hot in my mind as I was going through this to look at this to make sure that this wasn't overlooked. And I appreciate your very thorough explanation. So thank you.
Just to add one sentence about that. The DCISC has continually, for all these years, looked carefully at that pressure vessel integrity issue and those coupons, and we do that separately. But that's the point I made here, is that that's not a seismic safety issue.
Understood.
Okay, I think we'll move on to the next agenda item. Linda, do you would you like to add something?
Yes. Maybe this is a dumb question, but for Dr. Budnitz. The coupon issue. The thing that troubles me and other people is that they haven't tested a coupon that was extracted from Unit 1 since 2002, because PG&E got an exemption in 2012 and 2022 to test a coupon. They used a different method, my understanding is that they took a sample from a different but similar reactor vessel. I don't know where that reactor vessel was, analyzed that and said, oh, it's fine. There's not a significant amount of embrittlement. I have asked and asked PG&E, for instance, why on earth they wouldn't do a test on because in 2002, the NRC said that Unit 1 at Diablo Canyon was among the 5 most embrittled reactor vessels. So if you have something that you know is embrittled, why wouldn't you take a coupon from that actual place, the actual vessel itself, and analyze that instead of using something in place of the one that could really give you the most reliable information? That's my question. Thank you.
You addressed it to me, so I'll try to give you my view. This is not, again, the DCISC's view because I can't speak for them formally. We would have liked to have had more data than they have. But when we looked at the data they do have, we were satisfied that the vessel is still okay. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be okay for 100 years, but it's okay now. And it's okay for not just now, but for several years into the future, if not perhaps 20 years in the future. We convinced ourselves that that was true. And therefore, that although we don't know for sure that it'll last 100 years, we're very confident, I mean very confident, that that vessel's strength against embrittlement is sound with lots of margin today and for some years in the future. And having been convinced of that, we're satisfied that if they take a coupon out either this next outage or the one after that, it'll be plenty timely to understand that better. Okay, it's just as simple as that. We convinced ourselves of that, and we've consulted with other people and read other reports and that sort of thing that convinced us of that. But again, that's not a seismic issue, and here we are. This IPRP is a seismic forum.
Well, it could be a seismic issue if there's a thrust fault under the plant and that causes a cold shutdown in Unit 1. That could actually be a seismic issue.
It could be, but we've looked at that and we think that I'm not going to say it isn't, but it's very, very unlikely. And we'll defend that if you want. I can show you reports. And therefore, we didn't think it rose to the level of being one of the important issues. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, I would point out that I think that's a DCISC discussion point more than it's an IPRP discussion point. But Robert Rathey, please go ahead.
Yes, I just mentioned real quickly the report that the committee wrote back in 2011 with a great deal of assistance from Dr. Budnitz at that time, I believe, was the chair on PTS, is on our website under the topical library section. And I believe that report was written in context of a 20-year license extension at that time.
Okay, thanks. Moving to the next agenda item, Bob Anderson, I want to throw it to you on the EPRI question that we had talked about before. And you're still on mute if you're there.
Okay. I need to pull up the document to look at it. Okay.
And Bob, just for the lay people here, EPRI is an acronym for
Electric Power Research Institute.
Thanks.
And they do a lot of work with power systems and seismic issues. Not constrained just to that, but they do a lot in that realm. Okay, they're a very reputable group. So anyway, there was an issue that maybe someone outside of school for the DCISC as their primary area of concern, but I would surmount that they may look at it is in fact that there's equipment called Class 2 equipment, structure systems and components, or SSCs as it's called in generic acronym. And what they're doing here is looking at reliability issues of the plant on the basically the non-nuclear side. And so there's a database that EPRI put together, and it shows from 1971 to 2001 information about various pieces of equipment that have experienced some kind of level of seismicity, and that for one reason or another, the equipment performed out of spec or failed. So what we're looking at here is having this looked at possibly by PG&E and seeing that now that we're in 2023, and by the way, we just had a huge earthquake in Turkey, to look at least updating the EPRI data set if it hasn't been already. So we have a better background of information on what may or may not be threatened by earthquakes that aren't the design level earthquake for the site, but at the same time could be damaging to various pieces of equipment, and either separately or together may reduce the performance of the plant with respect to reliability issues. So that'd be for a PG&E issue.
Bill, please go ahead.
Yes, this is a question for Bob. Could you give me, cite the EPRI report number that you were referring to so that I can...
EPRI report?
The EPRI report, yes.
I have it in, if you shoot me your email, I'll shoot you the EPRI information that I have. I don't know the EPRI report number.
Okay, or if you...
It was an appendix in another report. And that's how I got aware of it. I think it's called the Interon report was with it. And that was about various different things that have had issues with earthquake performance in the past, including thrust bearings. But I would be pleased to send it to you.
Okay, how should I get you my email address? Is there a chat feature here? I'm not familiar with WebEx, so...
Yeah, there's a little chat feature. It looks like a little thought bubble in the bottom corner.
Oh, yeah, okay, I see it now.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I see it now.
Click on that and then pull up my name. And I'll give you my email address.
Or here, I'll send you mine. So
okay.
Bill, it's also in the invitation from David.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Bill posted his in the chat. Sorry, and I wanted to add one other thing, just going back to the IPRP's comments. I will be putting those up on the CPUC's website. It's already been submitted to the IT department. It might, I'm not in the IT department putting stuff on the web, so hopefully by Monday, Tuesday at the latest, it should be available there. So I think the next agenda item are updates from PG&E. I don't know who was planning to present. So who from PG&E is? Looks like Albert. Are you doing the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Can you share from your computer?
We're gonna find out.
Okay. Great. I can see that.
Perfect. All right. Thank you all. So again, my name is Albert Kotke. I'm from PG&E. I'm a geotechnical earthquake engineer. And today I'm going to be talking about the long-term seismic program update. Get my mouse in the right screen here. So just briefly, a quick introduction. Then we're going to talk about the Senate Bill 846 Seismic Hazard Update Plan, a brief update on some selected LTSP research activities and publications, and then talk about our response to the recent Turkish earthquakes, and then we'll probably have some questions and wrap it up. So first, the seismic hazard update plan. So Senate Bill 846 outlines a number of covenants that PG&E needs to respond to. The scope of this presentation is with respect to covenant number 13, which requires that the operator shall conduct an updated seismic assessment. It doesn't address covenant number 14, which is about evaluating deferred maintenance at the plant. In responding to this covenant, we're going to talk about 3 topics. Our per plan approach for an update the seismic hazard assessment, talk about sort of a potential team and what that's going to look like, go over potential topics for evaluation, and the timeline that would happen over. So an updated seismic hazard assessment needs to be considered in respect to the previous effort. In 2015, as we've talked about previously in this meeting, there was a probabilistic seismic hazard assessment that was completed. At the time that it was completed, this was a state-of-the-art assessment and still, in some opinion, is state-of-the-art. This was performed using a Senior Seismic Hazard Analysis Committee SHAC Level 3 process involving multiple
Albert, we lost your audio there for a sec.
We're still not hearing you, Albert.
This effort relied on multi-year studies addressing all aspects of hazard. So a tremendous amount of data was collected and ingested and interpreted to develop this evaluation. It also included significant new information on sources and site conditions that was collected as part of the AB 1632 effort. So in general, the 2015 study relied on at least 5 years of data collection, if not more. Since then, we have continued to work on refinement of the parameters, and we have been working on new studies regarding characterization of the ground motion and sources surrounding Diablo Canyon. However, when we think about where do we take this in terms of responding to the covenant, we're thinking about the completeness of the previous study, and how our new information fits into that. And the biggest source of uncertainty in the 2015 study was on the ground motion, its uncertainty, and the site effects. And at the moment, there have been no new published ground motion models that really provide new insights relative to what was done previously. We are on the cusp of getting to new modeling approaches that will provide new information, but they're not ready for application yet. So our planned strategy, and I think another aspect about when we're thinking about the scope of the study is we're still understanding what the requirements are. And so we've developed a sort of an incremental strategy where we would initiate a qualitative approach that with the flexibility to advance to a more quantitative approach if warranted. In this approach, where we'll be basically documenting comparisons on hazard inputs rather than going through and developing new logic trees and developing hazard curves. This would permit starting the process of collecting this information and documenting sort of this how that state of knowledge has changed since the 2015 study right away. At the same time, we would develop a plan for an alternative quantitative assessment, and also work with stakeholders, with the DWR, to understand what their requirements are, because those are still in development, but this would allow the work to start right away. We would present these qualitative hazard assessment results to the California Department of Water Resources, DWR's review team, and they would be able to weigh in on whether or not the results of the studies were sufficient to meet the covenant as well. If we found that in the comparisons of hazard inputs or through the review team or the stakeholders, that there was not sufficient confidence that no new information has changed, and we would elevate to an alternative approach if necessary. And this would be a SHAC level 1 modified study. So the basis for this incremental approach is that it allows us to start the work now while we're still sort of understanding what the requirements of the covenant are. It potentially provides resolution on this topic sooner, while other topics can be, because there's a lot of other work that is going on at the same time. It can be modified later based off of the results, so we're not sticking to this way, but it would provide a documentation of the changes. And I think there were some questions from, say, Bob Anderson on sort of what has changed, and this would provide that documentation of everything and compare it to what was previously used. And it would also provide the justification if more work was required, so that we could follow that. How would we evaluate whether or not we would move to a quantitative study? There's a number of different criteria that have been proposed. One is the pain et al. Study. Here they used a SHAC level 1 study to evaluate whether or not a SHAC level 3 study was required for Idaho National Labs. And in so they developed a number of sort of decision points. And the primary decision points that we would incorporate in this evaluation would be if there was a change in data models or methods, or if there was a change in hazard inputs. We would also look at additional criteria. For example, if hazard significant discrepancies are found within the previous study, if the updated inputs are outside the center body and range of the previous study, and if the evaluators do not have confidence in their assessment. And finally, if the recommended DWR reviewers are not satisfied with the effort. When we think about potential topics, I think these are sort of suggested topics, but we would really be looking towards the analysis team to come and cast a broader net, because PG&E has worked on some of these topics, but there's been also work by the community that could be impactful, and we would want to consider that. So looking at changes in data, models, and methods since 2015. Look at slip rate and geometry of local faults. And those local faults, again, are the Hosgre Shoreline, Los Osos, and San Luis Bay. Look at deformation models from geodesy, kinematics, and the Hosgre Fault transgression. Look at changes in earthquake catalog and the background model. And with respect to the earthquake catalog, we'd focus on events that are close to the plant that are again, hazard significant. In ground motion topics, we would look at a review of ground motion models. And when we model ground motion, we consider models of the median, but we also consider variability and uncertainty in them, and those would be evaluated. We would look at updates to the earthquake catalogs, focusing again on controlling events, and provide some evaluation of non-ergodic models, which we've been supporting work on for a number of years, and their potential application. In the 2015 study, we actually developed essentially non-ergodic models for the area, and those models were applied to the local faults. And so the new non-ergodic models, which really have spatially varying parameters, while being really valuable when we think about doing hazard over large regions, may not provide that much information for the plant. And on the right, I'm showing the magnitude greater than 4 events since 2014. And you can see that there's 4 and they're toward the north of the plant, not very close, and just over magnitude 4, nothing very significant. When we think of timeline, here we are in May already. So we're actually a little bit behind schedule already. So start out, get regulatory and stakeholder feedback about the process and sort of start work. Issue contracts and start data collection this month. In June, we would have a small initial team to begin evaluation and reporting of comparisons. By July, we would hope to identify whether or not additional assessment is required. If additional assessment where we'd be developing logic trees and performing hazard analyses, then we would start performing that contracting in August and with a kickoff meeting in September. However, if we find that we're convinced that, and the review groups are convinced that no additional work is needed, then we would develop that qualitative report in September, sort of closing out this seismic update. If we had to pursue a hazardous study, then we'd be looking to deliver that final hazard report in the summer of next year. So this is a very compressed schedule. It doesn't really allow for new information to be collected, rather looking at what was previously done and what has been done in the last few years and incorporating that. With that, we're going to turn it over to Chris to talk about updated seismic selected LTSP research activities.
Hi, this is Chris. Did we want to pause to discuss the plan or just move through the whole slide deck? Because there was a lot of information presented.
Yeah, David, I'll put it to you. We can talk.
Well, I see John has raised his hand, so I'll let John ask his question. Go ahead.
Thank you, David. John Giesman on behalf of the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility. I guess I have to say that to hear you, Albert, suggest that the process starts now, 8 months after the enactment of SB 846, is not very satisfying. And I have a difficult time understanding why you haven't proceeded previously to trying to review the Payne et al. Criteria for selecting between a shack number 1 and shack level 2 review, which that particular report very clearly indicates is the appropriate process when a shack level 3 has previously been performed. And then I'd point to the document that the Mothers for Peace circulated to this group a couple of days ago from Dr. Peter Bird from UCLA, who was a participant in your shack level 3 process and who very clearly was pretty disaffected by it. He represents an approach that seems completely outside the orthodoxy of the particular form of probabilistic analysis that PG&E has historically performed. I think you've got a much, much bigger issue here than you're acknowledging. And I'd remind you, the legislature and the governor have put nearly $1.5 billion of taxpayer money at your disposal. I think from a seismic standpoint, you need to make certain that that's wisely spent.
Bob, please.
Robert. Yeah, so thank you for that comment. And I think maybe Chris will be addressing some of that because that work by Dr. Bird, as you mentioned, he was involved in the shack process and it actually was considered and evaluated. Chris will be walking through that. Of course, we will be looking at new approaches, so that will be part of our process. Our long-term seismic program is an ongoing living program. So we didn't stop any work, research, assessments with filing the SHAC 2015 report. We're constantly funding, developing, and participating in research. And so those are activities that give us a really good basis to already have a fairly good understanding of some key work that's been going on or key information. So that gives us a good starting point. And again, we'll elaborate on that. And then we could follow back after we complete the presentation. John, if you're not satisfied, we can come back to that question.
Bob Anderson, I saw you were about to comment before.
Yes, this is Bob. I have a question relating to the timeline that's presented here in the graphic. It was my understanding, belief that this would all be done prior to the submittal of the license renewal application to the NRC. Is that correct?
Mark, do you want to jump in with that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Bob. I don't. I think Mark Krause would be the best person to answer that.
I'm sorry. I don't know that there's a commitment to that, and I think we need to. I think we need to talk further within PG&E whether there's any connection between those timings.
Well, then please do.
Yeah, this is Tom Jones. There is not in the legislation.
There is no definite timeline for anything like that.
Correct.
But it only makes inherent sense if you're submitting an application to the NRC. And you had this major study that you're doing this year, and whatever time that you finish, that it would be helpful to have it done before you have your license renewal application into the NRC. Does that not make sense?
I understand your point, but I don't think it takes into account the LTSP is often reviewed by the NRC, and it's an iterative process. But we'll take the look up on it, and we'll go ahead and go to Chris's portion of the presentation.
Okay, next slide.
I could not hear you.
Sorry.
Oh, Tom just noted that we would look in the requirements of updating it prior to the NRC submittal.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this before we move over to Chris? Okay.
Okay, Albert's going to run the slides for me. So I was going to give a quick update on our current research, focusing on studies that we presented at recent IPRP meetings and studies that are going to publication now. So in terms of hazard uncertainty, most of it rests within ground motion uncertainty, but from the seismic source standpoint, the largest uncertainty is from the Hosgri slip rate. And so in the meeting last year, I presented information on the USGS and UC Santa Barbara work to look at the Sam Johnson slip rate site off of Point Estero slope, which is basically a sand spit that crosses the fault. And the idea was that it formed about 12,000 years ago during the Younger Dryas, during a pause in sea level rise after the last glacial maximum. And this yielded a slip rate that was used in the last seismic hazard analysis, but it didn't have quantitative dates to support it. And so PG&E supported studies to go out and collect radiocarbon and OSL dates and look at the model for the development of this feature. So a paper was just published in Marine Geology in February discussing the formation of the feature. It did indeed form originally during the Younger Dryas and then has been modified since then. The geomorphic expression used slip rate characterization, that's still sound. And a manuscript was just submitted to Geosphere looking how the quantitative dates and the new analysis of the site slip rate. And the conclusion is that the slip rate really doesn't change. And this was considered in the previous seismic hazard analysis. So this is one of the projects that we presented to the DC ISC last fall. and the basis for at least the Hosgri slip rate really not changing much at this site. It has additional information and data that supports it. There's another study on the driver for coastal uplift and looking at whether you need reverse faults to drive a coastal uplift or whether it can be driven just by transpression on the Hosgri fault. So primarily strike slip movement, but a little bit of vertical. This was done by Dan O'Connell, used viscoelastic modeling, and it concluded that you can explain the uplift rates of the terraces on the coast just through mostly strike slip movement on the Hosgri fault. You don't need additional reverse faults. So this is just another data point that goes into the seismic hazard model. Next slide.
So I'm going to talk about some ground motion topics. The first was an approach for automated detection of clipping for broadband earthquake records. And so as part of improved earthquake catalogs, we're looking at using automated tools for collecting and processing ground motions so that we can start using a host of small magnitude data to better inform our ground motion models. And this was some work by Eric Thompson and the folks at the Golden USGS office at one of those. And this is part of the USGS ground motion processing GM process algorithm. Do you want me to, Bob, do you want to stop and ask Chris a question? You're muted, by the way.
Okay. For all these published articles that you have here, I haven't seen any of those submitted to the IPRP. So just a courtesy link to all these would be helpful in catching us up on what you're actually doing or have done.
Yes, and in terms of the information that's available for a reassessment, we provide annual summary reports to the IPRP, documents initial findings or what we're doing for research. Then we wait until the published articles come out. That's what would go into the new seismic hazard reassessment, but we can forward all the published articles to you.
That'd be perfect. That'd be very helpful to get us more aware of what you have done than what we are. Thank you.
So that ground motion processing algorithm was used in the next article that was recently published in Earthquake Spectra on a design safe ground motion database for California and surrounding regions. And this is a ground motion database of around 200,000 processed ground motions to help develop these new higher fidelity ground motion models. In a similar vein, published in the Bulletin of Earthquake Engineering, we were looking at evaluating the performance of non-ergodic ground motion models for the ridge crest area. So looking at traditional ergodic models and new non-ergodic models, and looking at how well they, using data from the aftershocks, how well could we better predict the main shock event from this small magnitude data. And so one of the underlying concepts for non-ergodic models is that we can use data from small magnitude events to help understand repeatable source path and site effects that can help reduce uncertainty for predicting main shock events. And this was published by Jorge Macedo at Georgia Tech, and where I'm actually working with Jorge now on collecting data from Turkey and doing a similar effort of looking at how well the Turkish events can be predicted using these techniques. And really the ground motion, the ground shaking from the big events. One of the challenges with the Ridgecrest data set is there's not that many stations in close that recorded the main shock event, whereas the Turkey event is really well recorded. I've been also working in the realm of improving the state of 2D and 3D site response analysis. And so published in SoftwareX is SeismoVLab, which is an open source finite element software for seismic mesoscale simulations. developed by Dominique Yasamaki at Caltech. And so this is a new platform for site response analyses that includes sophisticated solvers and boundary conditions that are sort of optimized for mesoscale, so kilometer scale problems. And this tool has been used at a number of different array sites, trying to understand how well it's working and what we're learning from it. And one of those efforts was documented by Brady Cox and his student in the Journal of Geotechnical and Geoenvironmental Engineering. And what the topic is, what is spatial area influences seismic site response analysis? And these are insights gained from multi-azimuthal 2D ground motion analyses at the Treasure Island downhole array. So looking at using 2D lateral varying velocity structure and looking at how well it improves the ability to predict site response. We've continued this work in looking at benchmarking different methods for performing 2D and 3D site response analyses and how well the different platforms are comparing to each other and how we can need for velocity information in those. With that, I'll pass it back to Chris.
There's a manuscript submitted on precariously balanced rock study methodology. The root paper that was published a few years ago now, very simple models. If the precariously balanced rock constraints are used, it would reduce hazard by, I think, up to 30% and hazard uncertainty by close to 50%. But very simple model, and we want to improve on that. We're doing additional work, doing more numerical simulations, improving processes. This manuscript is on improving ways to quickly do these studies. It's the virtual shake robot, and I presented on this before. It's a virtual shake table where you could put the whole outcrop and the precariously balanced rock or rocks on the outcrop and shake it in all different directions. And then as part of this, the group from Arizona State also developed a mini low-cost shake table to validate some of their results. This does not produce complex analyses. It's to help with identifying precariously balanced rocks that could be used for more study. Because our initial precariously balanced rock studies at Diablo took close to 10 years, and we'd like to do them more quickly. There's also reports and papers coming out on the fault displacement work that we've been UCLA, we've been working with them for, I think, close to 4 years now to develop new fault displacement models. So this isn't ground motion, this is the displacement on a fault trace. And 4 models have been completed, 2 of which are for all fault types. One is for reverse fault, and one is for strike slip faults. So those are all published as reports on the UCLA website. And what came out a couple months ago is a comparison report that compares all the results from all the new models plus existing models. And median model results for magnitude greater than 6 earthquakes are all within a factor of 2 or 3 of each other. And all these reports will be published in a special volume of Earthquake Spectra. There was another paper developed by Alba Padilla and Mike Oskin on secondary displacement hazard. The UCLA models that have been developed so far are on primary slip, but we're also interested in secondary fault displacement. So the Oskin group submitted a paper to BSSA. This is one of the first new models on secondary fault displacement. And because of the subtitles, I can't see the bottom of my screen. We've also been supporting Arizona State University on understanding uncertainties related to if a geologist maps a fault based on geomorphology, what's the likelihood that they're going to predict the location of the actual rupture? And we've done a few years of work on this, and their first paper has been submitted to Geosphere, and there's a few more papers to follow up, basically focusing on improving methods to identify faults from geomorphic mapping. Next slide. So I was going to present a few slides on our Turkey earthquake response. Were there any questions about the research topics that we mentioned in the last section before I move on?
Yeah, I have a question. Do you hear me, Chris?
I do. I hear an echoed.
Oh, I'm running on two devices. Hold on. Let me see.
If you mute, Gordon, if you mute one of them, it should solve the echo.
Yeah, I'm trying. There we go. Is that better? Do you hear me now?
Go ahead, Gordon.
Yeah. So on the precariously balanced rocks or these fragile land features, do you see how this will end this point, or is it too early?
So I missed a few words. How this will impact hazard? Is that what you're saying?
Right, because I mean, it'll change. It could modify the ground motion estimates, right?
Yeah. So when we did this for the Rude study, we found that only 20% of the alternative branches were consistent with the survival of the fragile features. So meaning that 80% of the branches were providing ground motion higher than what was consistent. So our conclusion from that was that these features can tell us something, but before we take that and actually do any meaningful work, we need to sharpen our pencil at every part along the process and collect more data before we go through. And sort of in the longer term vision is that once we finish collecting the data, we would develop a hazard study that would be, probably 4 or 5 years in the making in terms of developing new non-ergodic ground motion models. So one of the problems in evaluating is if you have too much variability in your models, both from the source characterization side as well as the ground motion side, we can't actually understand what's working and not working because the hazard curves are too flat. So we need steeper hazard curves to help to fit these precarious features. And so the long-term plan is a longer seismic hazard analysis workshop that would basically develop new hazard models using non-Poissonian hazard, non-ergodic ground motion models, and the latest information on source characterization, do preliminary hazard assessment, test those features, and go back to the logic tree and understand what's going on, and develop new hazard. And that's sort of the goal in the next, say, it depends on the fate of the plant and what's going to happen and all of that. But this is going to be the first time this has ever been done in such a rigorous manner. And so we're trying to get all our ducks in a row before we really rigorously apply it.
So one other question. So the landforms that you're considering, these features that are relevant to the plant, these are these marine stocks that are just south of the plant on the terrace?
That's right.
And you're not considering any other ones, or you didn't identify any other ones somewhere else?
So this is Chris. There are some other ones. I think in 2011, there was a reconnaissance around the plant, and the Double Rock site at the time seemed to have the best precariously rocks, or we call them fragile geologic features. But there are some others. But we want to apply some of these new methods developed by Arizona State to do quick assessments of these other sites to find out which are worth additional study. Because once you start studying, there's dating that has to go on, a lot of different analysis that takes years. And we want to quickly be able to assess all the other ones around the site and then do the best ones. And there's even some that are offshore on the offshore sea stacks that look quite precarious, and would consider those as well.
Right. Yeah, I was just concerned that if you only use the one south of the plant, you might have some kind of bias, right? Yeah.
Okay. So if there's no other questions, we're starting to run out of time. So I'll quickly go through these slides on Turkey response so that we can discuss our whole slide deck in more detail. So the Turkish earthquake sequence began, actually, I think it began a few years ago with a magnitude 6.7 earthquake. That's green, a cluster of seismicity on the upper left, and then in the map, upper right, on the Anatolian Fault. And then in February of this year, we had a magnitude 7.8. This got a lot of people's attention because at those magnitudes on a strike-slip fault, that's getting to what we call an event on the San Andreas. And you know, we don't get those very often in California. So you know, this is a great laboratory to study what happened. Within a day of that magnitude 7.8, there was a 7.5 on a different fault system. It wasn't an aftershock. So that's blue, and the aftershock for that, I mean the epicenter for that, Albert's pointing at. And then a few weeks after, there was a magnitude 6.4 down at the southwest end of the fault. And this is a large fault system. It's not quite like the San Andreas. It's got a lower slip rate. And even though it's quite long, I think up to 700 kilometers long, it's quite disorganized in the area that ruptured. It's got a lot of different fault strands. And then one of the things that was interesting about this was that the main shock started on a secondary fault and then jumped to the East Anatolian Fault. So next slide. PG&E has long had an earthquake reconnaissance program to learn from large earthquakes that happen in the US or other parts of the world. As I said, a large earthquake. So we want to go to where they happen to see what we can learn and observe the geotechnical effects, impact on utility infrastructure, and this improves our seismic safety and preparedness. So the table on the right shows some examples of reconnaissance efforts that we've had in the past. I won't go through all of them in the interest of time, but for example, the 1992 Landers, 1999 Hector mine earthquakes, which happened out in the desert, Southeast California. We learned that multiple faults can rupture together, chain together to produce much larger earthquakes. And it also highlighted static stress triggering. Right after the Landers earthquake, there was a 6.5 earthquake in Big Bear within a day. And then maybe even over longer time periods, the Landers and Hector mine earthquakes occurred generally in the same area, years apart. And so this information was used to tune characteristic earthquake magnitudes and maximum earthquake magnitudes in seismic source models. So we didn't just consider, you know, one fault or one fault in the adjacent fault, but whole strings of faults. And that's why for the Hosgri fault, in part, we allow earthquakes that include the entire Hosgri, jump onto the San Andreas Fault, and end up with magnitudes up to magnitude 8 due to this chaining together of ruptures. In the 1999 Turkey earthquake, we also found that ruptures often end at big steps. And this has been modeled. It's been the subject of a lot of research. What stops ruptures? And there's quantitative analyses of how many barriers, stepovers, et cetera, a rupture can go through, how large those stepovers are, or how large bends are before a rupture will stop. This is also used to tune our characteristic and maximum magnitudes. Have a lot of structural complexities, it's not very likely that your rupture will continue on. See, the most recent earthquakes that I'll jump to the bottom of the list is the Ridgecrest earthquake sequence. Started with a magnitude 6.4, and then on a separate fault that was orthogonal to it, we had a magnitude 7.1. So again, this highlighted the static stress triggering issue. It also highlighted that that fault wasn't mapped at the time, and same thing with the Landers and Hector Mine, the faults that ruptured in the Landers and Hector Mine ruptures. But subsequent research has shown that they could have been mapped based on the geomorphology. Those faults were just out in the middle of nowhere, and people weren't really looking in those areas. Compared to Diablo Canyon, where we've spent a lot of time looking at all the faults, mapping them in great detail. So PG&E has been coordinating GEAR and EERI. GEAR is the Geotechnical Extreme Event Reconnaissance group, and EERI is the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute. And we've been talking with teams that have been going over into the country to look at the initial effects. The photo on the right is from the first GEAR team. It shows large surface ruptures on the magnitude 7.8. We did not go over immediately because it looked like our presence there would be a drain on resources used for search and rescue. And we wanted to wait until after things had settled down, make contacts with local geologists and agencies, and then do lessons learned later in the year. We've also been doing coordination and information sharing with Southern California Edison on the performance of electric infrastructure and coordinating possible trip together to look at impacts. And then we've also been coordinating with SoCal Gas. Also, United States Turkish researchers. And as I said, we're planning for a reconnaissance trip later in the year. Next slide. So very briefly, lessons learned by the GEAR and EERI teams. The earthquake sequence produced very strong ground shaking, fault rupture and liquefaction, but few landslides. Some earthquakes like the 2015 Gorkha, Nepal earthquake produced lots of landslides, thousands of landslides and little liquefaction, for example. Buildings and utility infrastructure that incorporated seismic design generally performed well. So we saw a lot of pictures of collapsed buildings, even modern buildings that may not be built to code. But that's just a very initial assessment, and we will learn more as more in-depth study is done. And then, as I said, the magnitude 7.8 and on a short wouldn't think in and of itself. So research questions that we have on the geology geotechnical side: what's the relationship between the secondary fault and the East Anatolian fault? Is there anything predictive about the geometry or parameters of that secondary fault that would suggest that in California you could see similar geometry, and so this fault is more likely to produce a larger? And areas that we're looking at are like where the San Andreas and Calaveras faults come together. There's a little fault called the Sargent fault there. Maybe that's pretty like normally we wouldn't consider the Sargent fault as a big seismic hazard, but maybe an earthquake could start there and trigger a much larger earthquake on the San Andreas. And then how predictable is static stress triggering? So we saw that the magnitude 7.5 earthquake was triggered on a separate fault within, I think, 12 hours of the 7.8. And as we saw with Landers and Big Bear, Ridgecrest, this seems to happen. We're interested in how predictable that is, how ground motion models performed, and then infrastructure and building performance. So these are all things that we will look at during our reading papers that come out of this. So that's the end of my slides.
Thank you, Chris and Albert. If you could forward that to me so we can have it on file.
Yeah, we'll send it right afterwards.
Sam, just keep in mind we only have until 4 o'clock and it's 3:53. But Sam, please go ahead.
Just a simple question. I appreciated Chris's comments. He indicated the ability for multiple faults to be triggered in a larger event, and indicated that you've even looked at a scenario where the Hosgri, I thought you said, connected to the San Andreas, if I heard you correctly, producing a magnitude 8 earthquake. I think that's what you said. My question is, I think the historical largest earthquake we anticipated was about a 7.4. If in fact we had a magnitude 8, would it increase shaking at all relative to the scenarios you've explored in the past?
The 7.4 is just on the rupture topologies that include the Hosgri near the plant, but you also include a maximum magnitude earthquake, and if you do all the connectivity, you could conceivably connect it up to the northern end of the San Andreas. Very low likelihood and very, very low probability, but it's included in the model, which includes much smaller earthquakes and really large earthquakes. In terms of ground motion impact, that's not my area of expertise.
I would say in terms of ground motion, the plant is dominated by higher frequency, shorter period response. And so that's going to be that'll be saturated by that magnitude and won't really affect things. You may have a longer duration issue and more cycles of loading. But the rupture at that point is so far away, it's not going to be providing much. That might be more important for much longer period structures or regional risk assessments.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I wanted, since we only have a few minutes left, I wanted to move to kind of the open floor portion. Linda Seeley from Mothers for Peace, you had sent the comments from Dr. Bird. I can share that with the group. I have it queued up.
Thank you.
Find it. There it is. Here it is. Okay. So I don't know if you wanted to read it or if you just wanted to discuss it briefly. I'll leave it to you.
What I would like is for each person who is attending this meeting to separately read the comments. I'm certainly not a seismic expert in any way. So the thing that struck me and the Mothers for Peace was his conclusion that he feels that the fault, I can't remember the name of it, the one that runs under the plant, could be a thrust fault rather than a lateral fault, I think, and therefore could cause a lot more damage to, I don't think he said this in the thing, but I think the conclusion was that it could cause a lot more damage to the critical backup safety systems at Diablo Canyon than had previously been thought. And what it brings to mind for all of us is that this data that he used has been available and somehow it's been ignored, and we don't understand that, how PG&E could have all of the data and yet they haven't recognized this particular thing that he seemed to be able to identify pretty easily. That's about all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Just I emailed this in the same email with the agenda and the comments, so everybody should have it. But if you don't, I'm happy to resend it if you're interested. Floors. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, David, it's Bruce. I guess my question is, we've touched on some of these questions. It has to do with the uncertainty of the source mechanism, and in particular, some uncertainty as to the structures under the Irish Hills, which weren't illuminated, or certainly weren't clarified by the surface seismic exploration that was done there. I guess the question is this new information that members of the IPRP think we should do a separate analysis, and this may be even completely separate from SB 846. But should we have some time to look through this, frame some questions, and set an IPR meeting to consider what we think about that? I see at least one nodding head on that.
Yes.
It seems to me he's positing a factor of 2 potential increased impact. I think it's to hazard, and so I'd be certainly interested in participating in that if others are as well.
Can I speak for the DCISC? We of course just got this within the last day and a half. We are interested in trying to get to the bottom of this this document and what it means or what it claims. And so as you can imagine, we're going to ask PG&E what they think of it. And we'd be very pleased if the IPRP, you have a bunch of experts in some of the particulars here, could have a separate digging into this and express what you think, because that will help inform us. Well, I already know how to ask some questions, but I don't know what the answers are. In the intervening period, it's only just been yesterday. I went into the SHAC study that PG&E did, the 2015, and it's not so that these mechanisms were just completely ignored. They were considered and they were given certain deliberation, and there was some weight assigned to them. And it would be very interesting to the DCISC if other experts could chime in about what they think the weights ought to be on these models, because all the models, there are many different models, and this is one of them. And I think we'll have an open mind until digging around in there can tell us what the community thinks, and we'd sure love to have PG&E tell us what the SHAC study did with this. The statement that the SHAC study ignored it doesn't look like it's supported. I mean, it maybe, but it didn't look like it. But that's different from saying that they went with it either.
This is
Chris, please.
Yeah,
Sorry.
prepared on this, but we just got it yesterday as well, or late the night before. So we're still reviewing it. But in terms of what Dr. Budnitz said, the letter asserts that PG&E didn't consider geodetic data. It definitely considered that. Where the data were lacking, it collected additional data. It had 3 different researchers look at those data sets. It says that the model doesn't consider reverse faults beneath the Irish Hills. There's 2 of the 3 models used in the source characterization that consider reverse faults. It says that it doesn't consider hazard from unknown thrust faults. There's an aerial source model that has a percentage of seismic moment that would occur on unknown faults occur on thrust faults beneath the plant. So just from the preliminary review, a lot of these contentions don't seem founded. And looking at the document review list at the beginning of the letter, it doesn't include the 600+ page source characterization, which goes into great detail of all the data that were presented, including Dr. Bird's models, and then how they were used in development of the source characterization. So maybe that hasn't been reviewed in detail, because some of the comments don't make sense if you have that report.
Chris, I was also interested in what your view is of the statement that the previous study underestimated the tectonic strain rates. I mean, that's right there in plain English, and I'm not an expert in that in terms of the detail that you guys have spent so much time looking at those strain rates. And so there's just a few things like that where the technical detail is still to be explored.
Right, and strain rates were evaluated using a number of different methods: models, geologic data, geodetic data. And so in terms of the underestimation, I'm an expert in the geologic characterization. I'm not an expert in the modeling. So we're going to look more with our SMEs about under characterization or underrepresentation based on large scale models. But it's my understanding that multiple different lines of evidence were, in addition to just models, regional models that characterize strain rates, were used to characterize the strain rates for the different faults.
Chris, I went into the Shack study just yesterday to see what I could find. There's an extended treatment of those tectonic strain rates and many different models about them. But I think you guys are going to have to come back and tell us, the rest of the world, what PG&E's evaluation is of how that was done, and what and in light of this new paper from that we just got, whether there's any new insight.
And again, my expertise is not in modeling, but I know that all models that were used for the 2014 update to the National Seismic Hazard Maps, these different geodetic, kinematic, finite element models, those were reviewed and considered in developing the source model. And that's documented in the source characterization report.
Yeah, I noticed there was another element that was mentioned about a lack of seismographs to the west of the Hosgri Fault. We actually had ocean bottom seismometers for, I think it was from about 2013 to 2017. And the intent of those were to help us refine locations of earthquake events, see if we could lower the threshold for detection, and also to help us with focal mechanism determination. And we compared the results from the ocean bottom seismometers with our Central Coast seismic array onshore. And it did have some additional information, but it pretty much corroborated that the onshore seismographs are showing locations, focal mechanisms, all very well. And so that was another area that it's described, in various documentation. Those seismometers were installed for AB 1632. And so I think in part it is maybe a lack of really reviewing through the available information.
And Jeff, just quickly, you don't just use seismometers, you use multiple lines of evidence. So there's the offshore geophysics that characterize faults down to 4 kilometers. There's the map trace of the fault, the geology, all of that is considered together to go into the models. And if there are uncertainties, those are captured in the model uncertainties.
The other thing that
I'm sorry, I have to jump in because I don't want this to devolve into a full-blown review of of Dr. Bird's document. We're 7 minutes over, and I have to pick up my daughter, and I'm worried if I'm pretty sure if I close my window, it closes it for everybody. So I appreciate the enthusiasm to discuss this. I think what I'd like to do is we can have the people at the IPRP who are interested kind of do an initial review and maybe come up with a set of questions that we can pose to PG&E for a response, and we can go from there. That might be the easiest thing to do instead of continuing the discussion right now. And so just since I have to run, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. I'll add that in terms of the next IPRP meeting, we're typically on like about a 6-month cadence, and we want to take into account the DCISC's next 2 meetings in June and September. So I think right now the next IPRP meeting, excuse me, I think would probably be sometime in early November, but we can go offline on that and just figure out a date that works for everybody, and we'll figure it out. I don't know, in the next month or so. But thank you again to everybody, and yeah, sorry to cut it off. I have a 12-year-old waiting for me to go grab, so I'm gonna head out. And thanks again to everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, one and all.